Welcome this afternoon to our webinar, our joint session with the Nuclear Institute SIG. And the session today is Unlearning, a vital step in the process of innovation and change. My name is Sarah Slater. I'm the volunteering manager at APM, and we're working very closely with the NI to provide these webinars for you. This is the third in a small series we've been doing. We've got 3 people in the room, I think you can see amongst everyone else. So what I will ask in a moment is if everyone could come off camera and ensure you are on mute. So the main screen is the presentation. That would be great. And then we'll bring you back in the room after that has taken place. But I'm going to now really hand over to Thomas Morris. He's the chair of the joint APM and Nuclear Institute SIG. So he will be hosting and just doing a bit of an introduction and then handing over to the proceedings for the rest of the afternoon.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah, and a very warm welcome to everyone. For what a fantastic turnout. We're up to above 80 people already. And a massive thank you to everyone for taking the time this afternoon. So I do hope you have your mince pies and your hot chocolates at the ready. There is at least one individual that has a Christmas jumper on this call. There's probably more, but there's only one that I've seen so far. But I'm really looking forward to unlearn something today, and that is something I never thought I'd say. Concept of unlearning to me is a new one, just like it might be for many of you. So I'm going to pass over to the fantastic Anne very shortly, that's going to tell us a little bit more about unlearning and how it's going to be useful to us in our day-to-day jobs and our day-to-day lives. Before I do, very quickly, just wanted to introduce myself. I am Thomas Morris, and I am chair of the joint APM Nuclear Institute SIG on project management. And that SIG is more than just project management. It includes program management. As a program manager, was really keen that came about, as well as portfolio management, business change and transformation too. And learning and development is a very important aspect of that. So very similar to this particular group. So I'm passionate about this SIG because I'm passionate about nuclear. And I'm passionate about delivery. I think more than ever, UK needs nuclear, and we see that momentum is really building. What a fantastic time it is for nuclear. But we need to demonstrate that we can deliver. And that's what this SIG is all about. It's about demonstrating that we can deliver, but to deliver, we need to think of things in a different way. So to know a little bit more about this, please jump onto the LinkedIn site that we have. And you'll get to read the SIG strategy, and you'll be able to delve into a little bit of our thinking. And if you want, contribute. We'd be delighted to have individuals on this call contribute. Okay, so you're the lucky group that's one of the first to experience the new setup that we have as part of the SIG in its new format. This is the third of 3 webinars that we have had, and the other 2 are available and recorded. They are on the APM site. So this particular webinar is the great idea of Jonathan. And if Jonathan could just put his camera on now, give us a smile and a wave. And yes, he is the gentleman with the best Christmas jumper on the call as it currently stands. Hi, Jonathan. And a lady called Jo is also here, hopefully on the call with us as well. So Jonathan and Jo, 2 inspirational individuals that lead the knowledge and development. I can see Jo. Hi, how are you doing? That lead the knowledge and development strategic theme of the particular SIG that we're talking about here. So they are both here as well as myself to ensure this session runs really smoothly. There will be a Q&A session at the end, as Sarah has outlined, and you can ask your questions there. But enough of me now. Now on to why you're all here. I'd like to hand over to Anne, who will tell you a little bit about herself, and then we can get stuck into some unlearning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thomas. My name's Alder. I have been, I guess, involved in learning professionally all my professional career. I trained as a teacher. I then went and did teacher training, working overseas, came back to the UK and worked at a learning and development centre, a residential centre. Anyone with a history with BNFL may remember a place called Braithe in the Lake District where we did outdoor training, worked there, and then set up a business. And I've been involved in learning and development in business schools, universities, corporations, big international organisations since then. I'm now pretty much retired, but I pop up from time to time to do events like this. This idea of unlearning is probably relatively new in that form, but it's something that we've all done all our lives, and it's apparently a simple process, but in fact quite a complex one. We spend our lives learning. That learning informs what we do, it informs our behaviour. It's not just about knowledge, it's attitudes and beliefs and behaviours. And that's great. But sometimes that lets us down. And we need to go through a process of unlearning and relearning. It's probably true to say that we need this concept of unlearning more than ever before, because the process of unlearning is linked very much to change. And I think you'd probably all agree there's unprecedented levels of change in organisations, in the environment, in the world we're working in society, and we're constantly having to adapt and deal with those. It was about 30 years ago that a guy called Peter Senge created a real revolution in organisational thinking. He came up with the concept of the learning organisation. He described the need for organisations to be agile and responsive. And again, that sounds as though it's sensible and straightforward and ought to be simple. But the problem is that it isn't. And there are very few organisations, despite what they say, that have really got to grips with the process of becoming a learning organisation. And one of the reasons for that is probably because this idea of continuous rapid learning requires endless cycles of unlearning. And that process of unlearning means letting go of some of the things that have made us successful. And that is really challenging. So let's move on and think about what this process of unlearning means. So if we're going to think about unlearning, we probably need to just start by thinking what we mean by learning. And again, sounds obvious, but for the purposes of this, let's think about it as a shared concept. When we talk about learning, we're not just talking about acquiring new knowledge and skills. When we learn, we're building a mental map. We're creating new neurological connections, and those come together to create a set of individual and organisational constructs. It's a bit like a map, okay? We're creating sometimes called a personal construct map, and that is our own brain creating this model that tells us how the world operates and how we operate within it. That map strengthens certain connections, and the things that we've learned in the past, or the capacity to learn things in the past, start to disappear if we don't use them. So for example, if you think about a child's capacity to learn language, we all know that children will pick up any language that's thrown at them when they're young. But as they grow older, if they don't learn new languages, if they aren't exposed to language learning, those connections in the brain actually start to shut down. If they're not used, they begin to be edited out. And we've probably all experienced the sense of learning a new language later in life when that capacity to learn has reduced. So we strengthen certain learning, we strengthen certain beliefs, we create this mental model and mental map, and that drives our behaviour. And what that means is that anything that can't be easily accommodated into that map, anything that seems to be in conflict with those beliefs and the evidence for those beliefs and the experiences that we've had, starts to create some discomfort. And very often we reject that new learning or the potential for that new learning. So the idea that we can just learn something new is fine. And the idea that we can just keep doing what we're doing and believing the learning that we've had in the past is fine, until those existing mental models that we've created fail. And at this point, what we've learned in the past isn't fit for purpose. It's nothing to do with whether it was good learning or not. It's the fact that that learning is no longer delivering what we need it to. So this is when we need to unlearn. And unlearning isn't just about forgetting. It's not just about ignoring something. It's an active process in which we have to let go of certain aspects of the existing map. And that can lead to all sorts of stresses and inertias. Let me give you an example. I was working some years ago with a guy who was a manager of an ambulance station, providing, emergency services. And the whole nature of the work that he was doing changed. And he went from being an ambulance man, which was his identity, into being effectively a project manager, a budget manager. He was responsible for much more of the logistics and the administration than he ever had been in the past. And he was depressed. He was pushing towards retirement. And he came to me and he said, I failed. What am I doing wrong? I'm no longer up to this job. Very upset about the process. And I knew, was a great fan of old steam engines. Beautiful engineering. And I asked him, why we didn't use those steam engines on the public railways anymore. And he paused for a moment and I said, are they no longer beautiful pieces of engineering? Are they no longer great vehicles? And he said, of course they are. The problem is that, and I won't repeat his language, he was uncomplimentary. Those people changed the gauge on the tracks. And then he paused and he said, this is me, isn't it? I'm the person who is the steam engine. There's nothing wrong with me. It's just the context has changed. And that, is an example of the kind of painful process of going through and recognizing that you may have learned things, they've been successful for you, they've delivered what you needed them to deliver, but the world has moved on and changed. And this is one of the reasons why we experience such a lot of resistance to change, because people find the need to let go of the things that have made them successful really difficult. Quote that you've probably seen versions of, what got you here won't get you there. Once our existing learning starts to become obsolete, the need to unlearn, which is to break the old connections, let go of things that have worked for us, we start to get emotional responses to that. And as I've said, in the example I gave, these can range from positive ones, excitement, anticipation, yeah, there's potential out there, there's new possibilities out there. But for some people, through to the negative responses of anxiety and inertia, right down to different fear. And as you can see on the slide, these responses may be conscious, they may not be conscious, and we may find reasons why we're going to resist that change. So people will give practical level reasons. I don't know where I'm going to find the time to learn that, or, it isn't something that should be part of my job. A belief, I'm going to resist this new learning, I'm going to resist unlearning what I believe because I don't believe this new way actually offers a solution. Or, as in the example of the ambulance man that I talked about, at a level of identity. I don't fit anymore. I don't have any value. I'm worthless in this new environment. So, how do we encourage and support unlearning? We can see that these responses to the need to unlearn meet resistance. And we can encourage and support unlearning by following 3 steps. The first thing we need to do is help people to recognize what their old mental models are. So what is it you've been doing? What is it that you believe in? What is it that's worked for you to date? And now help them to understand why they're no longer relevant or effective. The second step is about letting go of those old models. And one of the ways of doing that is to really encourage and explore new possibilities. And then the third process is about embedding new mental habits. And that's about practice, grooving and refining those new things. Now, I'm not a psychologist or a neurologist, but there is some really interesting work around neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is very much about how fast the brain can develop, how fast it can change, how fast it adapts, even to the extent that if part of the brain is damaged, other parts of the brain will pick up that function. So if you're interested in that, certainly have a look at that. I want to now, in the next 10 minutes or so, just take you through an example of this process of unlearning in action. And I want to talk to you about a very simple puzzle that really illustrates this. And this is an activity that I've done in training programs. I've done this activity with boards of directors, with CEOs, with school children, with people across all sorts of sectors. And the process that happens is pretty much always the same. So a group of, I've said learners or unlearners, is given a simple looking jigsaw puzzle. This is a puzzle with wooden pieces. I tip them out onto the table and I ask them to make a jigsaw. That's it. And I'd just like to pause speaking for a minute and ask you to think, what do you think happens practically? What happens when people are presented with this random pile of wooden pieces on the table? If you want to put a quick response into the chat box, please do. Otherwise, just take a moment and think about what is going to happen. Yeah, somebody's put, Tony, thank you. You've put sorting and organizing of shapes. What else? People starting with the outside pieces, looking at the picture on the lid, trying to do this jigsaw matching the colors together. Yeah, all of those things. Let me describe the process that normally goes on and keep your questions coming. The first thing to say is, one or two of you have said, look at the picture on the box. There is no picture. There is no picture, so there is no existing model for people to work to. All they have is these wooden components. What happens is that 100% of the time, people take the pieces and they turn them over so that the colour side is facing up. The next thing they do, and someone has just suggested this, is they look for the corners. You can see in the bottom right of the photograph there's a piece that looks like a corner, 2 straight edges. So they pick those up. They look for the corners. If they're talking to each other, they may suggest, let's find the corners. Let's look for pieces that connect together. And there's a fair bit of busy work that goes on. And it's pretty unproductive, because actually this puzzle doesn't work like that. So, as many of you are suggesting, the pieces are turned over, they're sorted, they're assessed. There's a fair bit of early trial and error experimentation. They look for the corners and the straight edges. Now, why do we do that? Well, clearly why we do that is because that's what we've learned. That's how jigsaws work. We have usually a reference picture. We haven't in this case, but we make an assumption. The green facing up in this picture is clearly the right side up. the corners with the two straight edges are clearly the corners. That's what we know. That's what we've learned. That's how jigsaws work. And I'm always amazed at how long people will continue to work on this with those assumptions in mind. Matt Wyndham, thank you. Some people go and make tea for the others. We could be here for a long time. Yeah, we could be. Because what happens in this jigsaw is they have some limited success. Some of the pieces fit together, most of them don't. It doesn't fit, the map doesn't work, the mental map's ineffective. So people get to a point where they start to recognize that the old learning isn't working, and they have to break those assumptions that they're bringing with them from the previous learning. Again, feel free to stick an answer in the chat box. What do you imagine happens when they get to that point of frustration? Again, I'll just give you a minute to think. This isn't working. We need to do something different. What might be suggested? Some of them give up. Yes, Jonathan. Some people disengage. Absolutely. Some people, somebody's written interestingly, blame the stores, two puzzles mixed up. Yeah, we maybe start to look for something that isn't right here. Have you given us all the right pieces? Why isn't this working? But they also start to ask questions. They start to ask questions about the assumptions that they're making. Has anyone said that the straight edges are on the outside? Do these corners have to be corners? Is this a solid shape? Could it be three-dimensional? Is it a shape with a hole in it? And so all of the things that they know about jigsaw puzzles start to be questioned. They reach a point in this process where unlearning is required. They need to accept their assumptions must be challenged, and they suggest new ideas and possibilities. And one of the things that often emerges is someone saying, why does it have to be painted side up? That's what we've learned. That's what we've assumed applies in this situation. But why does it have to be this way up? And I've seen many occasions where someone will tentatively pick up a piece, turn it over to the wrong side, and try and fit it. And I've seen other people either say, don't be silly, or you can't do that, or that will never work. And I've even seen people reach across, take the piece and turn it back to the coloured side. So strong is the past learning about how this should be, as well as how it is, that they will very often resist the suggestions that are being made. But gradually, they begin to see a new pattern emerging. This is what the finished puzzle looks like. It is a solid shape. It does have corners, but the corners aren't necessarily the corners of the green shapes there. So through a process of experimentation, often quite slow and often quite difficult, they start to establish a new mental map. And that new mental map tells them that the big coloured pieces are framed by the smaller upside down pieces. So they start to build that, and it works and a new pattern emerges. And they begin to make fairly rapid progress. So we've got 6 big green pieces, we've got the little brown ones that go around them, and that works for a while. But as you can see, there's one piece with the red arrow pointing to it that breaks the new pattern. And having just learned a new pattern, it's challenged again. Now, I worked with this puzzle exactly as you see it, with a very senior team. And one of the senior managers picked up that piece that the arrow's pointing to, the brown piece, turned it to green and tried to force it into the space. And it didn't fit. And he tried again and it didn't fit. And he did what some of you have said. He assumed that I'd given him the wrong piece. So he brought it to me and he said, this piece doesn't fit. It must come from the wrong bag. And I suggested to him that he went back and tried it again. And at that point, one of his colleagues picked up the piece, turned it to the brown side and slotted it in. And he said, okay, I can see that it fits, but I don't like it. Which I thought was a really interesting comment. And I said, my assumption, and here again, you know, my learned assumption was that he didn't like it because he hadn't seen it for himself, that a colleague had to demonstrate to him how it worked. But that wasn't the case. His words were, I don't like it, it spoils the pattern. Which I think is a really interesting reflection on this idea of learning and unlearning. Learning and unlearning is about making patterns and breaking patterns. We learn something, we develop a pattern of behaviour, a pattern of thinking, it makes sense to us, we can see that it becomes quite predictable, we know what the responses are going to be, and that pattern is strongly formed. Then when the pattern breaks, we don't like it. And we don't like it for a number of reasons. One is that as human beings, we are inherently pattern seekers. We really, really like to make sense of stuff, and pattern making is one of the ways we make sense. So we move to this concept of an open mind. And I think, you know, it's pretty clear just from the example I've given you that really there's no such thing. Every time we come into a new situation, we bring with us everything we've learned to date. And that informs that new situation and how we respond. And we need to help people to learn and unlearn at different levels, and that's practical levels, emotional, psychological levels. For example, at a practical level, you know, many of us have had to unlearn the skills involved in chairing face-to-face meetings and learn to facilitate effectively in a video conference call. Recent examples. At a deeper level, many of us been through a process in the last few years of unlearning a particular belief about how something should be done. For example, beliefs about how we manage people or motivate people that, you know, young graduates, for example, coming into our organizations now may not accept. They may reject those beliefs, and we have to recognize that we need to unlearn those in order to do something different. Next slide, please. Some of the most challenging things to unlearn are things that you have learned throughout your lifetime about yourself. And we find situations, for example, where we might receive feedback or experience something that challenges our own self-perceptions. Some of the hardest unlearning is unlearning lessons you may have learned, you know, for a long time ago. And the examples might be a child who grows up with people telling him, oh, he's the shy one or she's the disorganized one. And that becomes learning. It becomes part of that individual's mental map. And in order to change, in order to ask people to change behaviors, we're asking them to unlearn a really deeply held belief and relearn a different view of themselves. Another example might be recognizing patterns in your own emotional responses in situations, and when those learned behaviors are not giving you the responses that you want. Yeah? So you realize that a particular behavior triggers an emotional response in you that's no longer appropriate, it isn't getting results. Can you unlearn that deep-seated response and actually learn, teach yourself or be helped to learn different ways of reacting that may be more constructive? So these are examples of how unlearning isn't just about facts and knowledge and systems and whether I can use Teams rather than Zoom. It's right down to a deeper and more emotional level, that the learning we've acquired has to be challenged sometimes, it has to be broken effectively in order to unlearn and then begin the process of relearning. So just to wind up this before I take any comments or questions from you, there are some things that we can do. If you're interested in helping people to unlearn, when people are stuck, when they recognize that what they're doing isn't working, but they don't know what to do next, there are a few things that you can actually help with. The first thing is you have to recognize that learning has to be done willingly. We can't force other people to learn. Learning is a process that's internal. People have to want to learn, and therefore, to want to learn, they have to see the benefit, the payback, the personal value to them. So part of asking people to change, which is very much what this is about, is really helping them to see what the benefits of that change are to them. Unless they see those benefits and unless they value those benefits, there's going to be resistance. The second thing is allow time. This process of learning, unlearning and relearning takes time. You know, there may be things where people get it really quickly, but by and large, it does take time. And what particularly takes time is the acceptance of the need to change, the acceptance of letting go, and then, as I said earlier, the practicing and grooving and rehearsing the new behaviours. So check in with people and offer support. We can encourage people to pursue the unfamiliar. Try things, experiment with things, do something different. But of course, that also means that you have to tolerate some mistakes. You have to take the risk that things will not work first time round. So finding the environments in which those risks are okay, finding places in which those risks are not life-threatening or, you know, safety risks or emotional safety risks, important. Develop questioning skills, encourage people to seek out other people who think differently. Encourage diversity. It's one of the real advantages of having variety within your teams and within your functions, because you will get the people who ask the question that someone else hasn't thought of. And set achievable step-by-step new pattern goals. Don't make it too daunting. Give people a small change. Ask them to unlearn something that isn't too significant to them. Give space, give time, and then the expression that's often used in unlearning is flood them with opportunities to use and groove in the new patterns. Accept that there's some discomfort and accept that in time that discomfort will go and that the new pattern will become the existing pattern, and that will work for as long as it works. And then we repeat the cycle again. That brings me pretty much to the end of the presentation part of this. It's finished with a quote from Alvin Toffler. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn and relearn. And I'm pretty convinced that this process of learning, unlearning and relearning is the core skill that anyone involved in learning and development should be working with. And if you're not, then have a little think about why not, because this is something, whatever other training and development people get, people need to become better learners. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Anne. That was fantastic. I'm going to rush along because we've only got a couple of minutes, but we should be able to get a couple of questions in. I was going to ask actually, Jane Mills, if you'd like to turn on your camera and ask your question about embracing the more mature members of staff.
Yeah, it is a question because we're going through a lot of change management. I think a lot of organisations have had to do this as a result of COVID, new ways of working. I think the organisation wanted to do it anyway, but it obviously fast-tracked that process. And I think a lot of people have gone, they've left, and I think I know a few people have given exit interviews, and I think their concern was that they felt exactly like your ambulance chap, that they didn't feel they had anything to offer anymore, which I thought was a great shame, because I think a lot of them had an awful lot to offer. If we'd approached that properly and getting their ideas and making them feel comfortable to do that. So that was my question. Any advice on how we can engage with people so they still feel relevant, and they still feel they have, you know, something to offer, you know, even if they do have to go through this process of unlearning and relearning?
I think, to be completely honest, Jane, I think when you've actually got people to that point, and as you say, if they're older and they're kind of established and they're ready to move on, it becomes really difficult. And this is one of the reasons why trying to build teams, build organizations that build really conscious learning and unlearning into their project management, so that it becomes more of a cultural thing, is really important. And with those people, absolutely. I mean, you know, consultation with them, asking them to reflect back and think about how they learned and what worked for them, and how they got to the point where they were skilled in their jobs, and what they could then pass back from that learning to others, can be helpful, unless they'd completely switched off and disengaged. But what we're trying to do is, you know, and the concept of the learning organization is very much about trying to avoid getting to a point where people do what they do for so long and then just hit the wall when it doesn't work. And I mean, I've done a lot of work with project managers, working with the Institute for Project Management and so on, and really trying to encourage project managers to think about planning, learning consciously and actively into their project plans, so that there's always the opportunity for, you know, active reviewing, not just of project progress, but of what we've learned at this stage in the project and what we can do with it. And that way, you know, everyone then is beginning to see that learning is running hand in hand with the actual task delivery or the project delivery. So I think it might be a bit too late to fix it for people who haven't had that experience, but we can certainly start to fix it for people who haven't.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Yeah, excellent. Good. No, that's brilliant. I mean, it gives me an opportunity to kind of guide you to the recording of our previous webinar, which I've just put into the chat, Jane. So John Hovel was talking about knowledge retention strategies and the knowledge retention process, which is a really great one for engaging some of the more mature people, some of the more experienced people, and also a way of capturing what they know. So I do have a look at that. That's really good. It's 13:14, so we've effectively run out of time, I'm afraid. I think we could have gone on for a lot longer. And thank you ever so much to Anne for really fascinating and interactive session. And thank you all for watching. That was I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope that you did as well. So
thanks,
thank you very
Jonathan.
much.
And I'm aware of the fact we didn't have a lot of time for questions. If anyone wants to follow it up, I'm more than happy to answer any questions you can forward on to me.
Thanks, everybody.
The thing is not to be scared of it, Sarah.
No, that's
it can
right.
be a bit of a bumpy ride, but we'll get there in the end.
Bit unnerving, but worth a go. So
That's right.
yeah, enjoy everyone, and take care. And if you do have any ideas for new topics of interest, then please do let us know.
Excellent. Thanks, Anne.